All right, everybody. Part two in the detailing video series. I'm going to go into more detail, no pun intended this time, about the paint correction process, right? And the two main methods that there is for paint correction, as well as an alternative method that kind of gives you the same effect, but without actually doing a correction, right? So I've got some notes here to help me hit all the important points that I'm going to be referencing when we go through. So, two main ways to correct paint. You have compounding and polishing, right? So I have over here on the whiteboard, I wrote down to kind of give some notes, the big takeaways for these two methods. So you have compounding. It's aggressive, right? Compounding is what you do when you need to do, a big correction. You either have a lot of imperfections or very bad imperfections, very deep imperfections. And so it's a lot more aggressive. Also known as cutting, right? Pads, which I'll get more into in a separate video where I'm just going to cover the pads. There are pads out there that are known as cutting pads. Those are the ones that you generally would use with a compound. You can use a polishing pad with a compound if you want to be less aggressive on the paint. So essentially you would use an aggressive product with a less aggressive pad, right? So if you wanted to dial back the aggressiveness, if you will. But generally speaking, cutting pads go with compounding, all right? And then polishing. Polishing does the same thing as a compound, but in generally speaking, polishes are less aggressive. And they are going to impart shine, all right? Compounds generally aren't going to leave you with a shine. You usually have to follow it up. Why is that? Well, let's talk about that. So if you're going to compound a car, generally speaking, that means that you are going to do something that's known as a two-step, right? Or a two-step paint correction, right? Why is that? Because you can't compound a car and then just leave it as is and put wax on. Reason being is because compounds tend to be so aggressive that they actually leave scratches behind. So it's like 2 for 1, basically, right? So you're using a compound to get rid of the big imperfections and clean up the really big, mistakes that you have on your paint. But in doing so, it's leaving smaller imperfections that you then have to clean up and follow with a second step. That second step generally being a polish, right? So the polishes, since they're a lot finer, not as aggressive, they are better at going after the more minor or medium imperfections, right? So that's what you would do in order to get your paint fully correct on that. So let me just look at my notes here. Yeah, so because it's aggressive, it leaves behind a lot of scratches, right? And then compounding would follow that up. Now, you can also do just a polish. If your paint isn't as bad, you can just do a polish, right? And polishes, just like compounds, come in different levels of aggressiveness. As a general rule, polishes are less aggressive than compounds, but they all come in different grades. You can get heavy cutting compound, medium cut compound, light cut compound, same thing with polishes, right? So you can also use, there's some polishes also that are less on the polishing side, meaning like abrasive, and more on the, shiny side where they have chemicals and acrylics and stuff put in them to give you more gloss. Okay. The next thing you could use other than these two methods is known as filling. All right. And filling is not really a correction, right? So you're not actually correcting any paint when you fill. You're using a chemical that has polymers and fillers and other things inside to actually fill in those scratches, like we talked about in the first video. Okay, so what are those kinds of products known for, right? Or not to say known for, what are they called, right? They're generally called glazes. So if you see something in the class of product that's called a glaze, for the most part, those are things that are not going to correct. They're gonna enhance your paint by making it look deeper, wetter. They're gonna put more gloss. They're gonna shine it, and they're gonna contain some fillers. That being said, there are some glazes out there that are actually a finishing polish as well. Okay, so those products are actually pretty cool because since they have a little bit of abrasive technology in it, when you first start working it into your paint with a polisher, it's going to remove some of those very fine micro scratch imperfections, and then very quickly the glaze component of the product's going to come in, and it's going to start to lay down a nice layer of gloss and then fill in anything else. So that's what you'll see. Okay. The only way to know for sure is you have to read the details of the product. So if you go and look at a product that's called a glaze, you're going to have to read on it and see what it says. If it contains any language, any language in the product details that talk about paint correction, removing swirls, scratches, things like that, then that glaze is actually more of like a fine finishing polish, more than a glaze. If it contains that kind of language, but also contains kind of filler language, well, then you know it's kind of both. And then if it doesn't contain any of the paint correction language, and the product details just talk about enhancing gloss, enhancing richness and depthness, and all that, then it doesn't have any correction properties to it, and it just puts on a better shine. So in my lineup of products that I'm going to roll out once I get them all in, I have a few coming in, and then I'll show them all. I actually have 3 products that are labeled as a glaze. One of them is a pure finishing polish. It doesn't have any fillers in it at all, even though the manufacturer calls it a glaze. One of them has both. It's got a little bit of fine finishing polish in it, and it has some of the fillers in it. One in particular, it has acrylics, and I'll talk about why I chose that one when we do that video. And then the last one that I have is a pure glaze, no correction capability, no nothing. It's just a pure paint gloss enhancement. So I will talk about all of those when we get there. All right. So so I talked about 2-step versus 1-step, right? So if you're compounding, generally that means it's going to be a 2-step process. You're going to compound, and when you're done compounding, you're going to do a polish. You can add a 3rd step, right, with those finishing polishes or glazes that I talk about. And those are even finer, okay? So all of these products, with the exception of true glazes, cut or abrade your paint. They have abrasives in them, all right? The best way I can describe what that is like, imagine if you could take sandpaper and put it into liquid form. That's kind of what it is, right? They've taken some sandpaper, like properties, they put it in a liquid form, and you go ahead and use it on your paint. The heavier aggressive stuff, the abrasives in that chemical never go away. They're basically there. They're going to create dust as you're working it in the paint and the product begins to dry. It begins to dust, and so you'll have to dust away. The less aggressive you go, and the finer correcting ability you go in product, you start to get smaller abrasives, almost like finer grain sandpaper. And then some of the really cutting edge new technology polishes out there employ something called diminishing abrasives, meaning these are abrasives that are put into the product that break down as you work the product. So it starts off by giving you correction, and then it finishes very, very gently to almost kind of condition the paint and moisturize the paint and give it like a really nice gloss, right? I like those. Actually, every product that I use on my car is a diminishing abrasive. for a couple reasons. One, my paint job's not horrible condition. It's got swirls, it's got scratches. It's a black car. It's going to get them throughout the entire year. So I get the diminishing abrasives and the light polishes because it starts to do a correction, but it's not too hard on the paint, and it does it very, very quickly. And so that's main reason number one. And then number two is these less aggressive polishes really do a good job of maximizing shine. So they're more geared towards maximizing shine versus paint correction, because I don't need to use something to do a heavy correction. Now, full disclosure, I got a two-step done on my car a few years ago, right? I mentioned it in part one, how I got a scratch at Hot August Nights, and they went ahead and fixed my fender, and it looked amazing. Well, after that, I decided the following year, show season, basically, to have a two-step done on the car. Like, I was like, okay, I bought this car, never had it really fully corrected. And so I had a good friend of mine that I actually met out at Hot August Nights in the Adams detail booth, Victor Diaz. He's got his own detail place in Reno called Truckee Auto Detail. So look him up. Came out, did a two-step on my car. So he did a Adams polish, compound followed by a polish, and then buffed it, and then put my sealant on it, and that was it. So because I maintain my car very, very well, I don't need to do another compound. I probably will never have to do another compound just because I maintain it. So every year, I do, once a year, I do a very light, minimally abrasive correction. All right. Now, depending on how things go this year, because I am introducing another product, I may not do one next year. Like, if my paint doesn't look that bad, I may just, use some filling stuff and just see how it goes. But the point is that, once you do a compound, a two-step one time, if you maintain your paint really well, you don't ever have to do it again. You can just do a one-step with just a polish, or no step at all and just use fillers. Just depends on how it goes. So, so let me just turn over here, just make sure I cover everything I think I did. Okay, one last product we're going to talk about. So I've talked about compounds, I talked about polishes, I talked about like finishing polishes, or the combination of like polish glazes type stuff, talked about glazes. There's another product out there that is out there for folks, makes more sense for the professional detailer type, but if you want to use it, you can. It's known as an all-in-one. Right? What's an all-in-one? An all-in-one is exactly what the name sounds like. It's a product that is a compound, a polish, and like a sealant or a wax all in one. So the product starts out aggressive to correct paint. And then as you work it, it gets a little bit less aggressive, turns into more of a polish, right? And then as you keep working it, it turns into a straight up, like all the abrasives go away, and then it's just a sealant that's left behind, or a wax type that's left behind. And then when you're done, you wipe it away, you buff it, and you're done in all one step. Now you may be asking yourself, okay, wow, that sounds amazing. Why wouldn't everybody do that? So there's an old saying that goes, jack of all trades, master of none, right? So an all-in-one doesn't really compound, polish, seal your car as good as one of those chemicals dedicated to that job in general, right? There are some all-in-ones out there that are amazing, and I've seen professional detailers swear by them. One of them that comes to mind that I see everybody talking about on detailing forums is known as 3D1. Everybody loves 3D1 because it does leave a really great finish on a car. And the reason why pro detailers love it is because detailers get paid by the job, right? So the more jobs they can cram into a day, the more money they're going to make. Well, an all-in-one allows them to run a machine over the car one time. You don't have to run it over one time for a compound, buff it, run it over again for a polish, buff it, run it over again for a sealant, right? So if you do a true 3-step where you compound, polish, and then apply a wax or a coating or a sealant, that's almost an all-day thing. I remember when Victor came and did the two-step on my car. He was here for about 5.5 hours total from start to finish. So, if if you're doing this for a living, a two-step followed by a wax or sealant job, you're doing 2 cars a day, right? So all-in-ones allow you to get through, 3, maybe 4 or 5 cars in a day, depending on what time you start in the day. So all-in-ones are great for that. Also, if you want to get something like that for a daily driver, you can do it in a Saturday morning, right? You go out there, you wash your car, you clean it, you good, you make sure the paint's all nice and decontaminated, do it all-in-one all over one time, and you're done, right? So the all-in-one products have their place. Now, I mentioned all of these chemicals will work differently with different pads. All right, so a compound is going to be the most aggressive. It will work the most aggressive with pads designed for compounding. If you want a compound effect, but you don't want to go as aggressive, you can use it with a less aggressive pad like a polishing pad. Same thing with polishes. If you want to use a polish, but you want your aggressiveness to go up, you can use the pad, right? You can use the pad that's more aggressive to compensate it, or you can dial it back. If you want your polish to be the most aggressive thing on your paint and not your pad, you can make your pad be very minimally aggressive, or even use a finishing pad that has like no cut on it whatsoever. So I actually did that last year. I have a very fine polish that I use with a pad with no cut. So that means all of the correcting that was done on the paint was just the chemical. It wasn't the pad as well helping the chemical. And I did that for a reason. I did that because, as I said in part 1, least aggressive to more aggressive. So it was the first time I had ever used a machine on my car, me personally. So I wanted to be gentle. So I said, all right, I'm going to get a pad that is not going to screw up my paint in case I screw up. And then I'm going to use a chemical that is very gentle, water-based, has diminishing abrasive technology in it. It's basically going to correct my paint, and then as I work it, they're going to go away. And it worked out amazing. It worked out really, really good. It removed probably 95 to 97% of the flaws and imperfection that were in the paint. This year, I'm going to change it up a little bit. I'm basically going to go up slightly in the aggressiveness on the pad with the same chemical to try and make it even cleaner, right? So I'll talk more about that later. And then I'm going to have a video on pads by itself. So that will probably be a couple of videos from now. So that covers the paint correction methods, and then the one alternative method, which is filling, right? On my next video, we're going to talk about when you're done doing any kind of correction or filling or anything like that, what do you put on top? You put your protection and your max shine. So your waxes, your sealants, your coatings. We'll talk about that next. Until then, hopefully this video was informative for you.